Second of the two videos for October 31st. So we're going to go through the different ways that you can set up training in classrooms and online. So the first kind of training and the most classic way that we do training is classroom instruction. So a lot of you will work in organizations, or perhaps you've interned in organizations where they have a classroom because they do a lot of training, especially larger organizations will have this. This gives the opportunity for the instructor to interact directly with students and to answer their questions immediately, instead of, like, if you take an online class, having to wait for the instructor to follow up with your email, or going on a discussion board and writing a Q&A, that sort of thing. Also, when you have classroom instruction, the instructor can demonstrate in person or live for you what it is that they're trying to train you to do. And so then you can practice live as well with them, and they can give you feedback in the classroom. We have a lot of different classroom layouts. I'm sure you've all had classes in some of these kinds of layouts, and you can think about how those layouts affected your relationship with the instructor versus other students in the class. In the College of Business, most of our classes are set up as a classroom. And in fact, I think my understanding was our tables were supposed to be more movable than they are, so that we could actually do some of these different kinds of classroom layouts, especially breakout groups, but they gave us very heavy tables, so it's very difficult to do in classrooms. So a lot of times we just do the classroom. The classroom is classic. It's kind of the stage on the stage where you have an instructor who's talking to or lecturing to a class. There's less interaction between the students in the class. Most of their interaction is with that instructor directly. In a U-shaped classroom, I've seen these in like leadership studies, for example. So you'll have like seats that go around, kind of like a theater a little bit around the side. This is a little bit like a classroom, but there's a little more interaction because you can see other students in the classroom a little bit more easily because you're not all looking forward. And then the theater is very similar. It's just much bigger. You've been in a theater like McCain Auditorium, for example, probably, where the person on the stage is really dominating, because not only can you not interact with the other people very easily because you're in rows, but there's also just many of you. So you often have to have a microphone in the theater. A seminar, some of you may have had this experience. If you go to graduate school, some of you may have this experience with seminars. All of my graduate classes were seminars, or almost all, except for very large classes that were more like classrooms or breakouts. In a seminar, everyone's around a table and then they're discussing something. So some of you may have like more smaller trainings that are more like seminars, where you are learning about something very specific for only an hour or two, and you're going to sit around a table and discuss that with other people. You might be working together with those people at that table. So the seminar is for a much smaller group. And then the breakout is when you can go into breakout groups. This would have been ideal during your group projects if we could have moved those tables. And so it's easier for then groups to work. But you can see in the breakout, the kind of instructor is gone on this one, as is on the seminar. The instructor is around the table, but it's less about the instructor teaching and lecturing and more about students interacting with each other. We also can have virtual instructor-led instruction, and I bet a bunch of you have some experience with this, especially during COVID, but even since, now that a lot of students can take classes online, even part of their classes online during the semester. So this is just virtual instructor-led, is what we call synchronous learning or synchronous classes, where the instructor's online at the same time the students are. So it kind of works like the instructor in the classroom would, where they can answer questions immediately, they can demonstrate on the screen, but this also allows you to have students who maybe aren't in the exact physical location that the class is taking place in. You can also do this, like I've had classes when I was in graduate school where there's actually a room, and the room is beamed into another classroom where someone's actually teaching the classroom, and that person at the classroom can see the classroom they're actually teaching in, as well as the classroom that we were sitting in. They were in Michigan, we were at Nebraska, and that was the way we learned that class. Some of you may have that experience in a workplace too, because a lot of workplaces will have offices in different places, and they may have classrooms where they can beam into each other's classrooms as someone's teaching, so that you get some students who are getting classroom instruction and some that are getting synchronous distance learning. When the teacher is not on, when the students are, or often what happens is you'll have pre-made modules that you'll go through at your own pace. This is what we call asynchronous distance learning. Most of our online courses, I think, in the College of Business are probably asynchronous distance learning. And this has the advantage that for learners, they can get on and start learning whenever they want to and whenever they have time to. So this works really well for a lot of people's work schedules. It also means that if this is a training you want a lot of employees to have or that you're going to use for a very long time, you can sink a lot of money into developing those modules initially, and then you can update them here and there, but essentially they'll run themselves if you leave them online and available for learners. The disadvantage, though, is that because there's not someone directly teaching during the same time that the students are online, if they have questions, they may have to contact someone through email or some other means where they're going to have a delay in response. And so it's not as immediate as classroom instruction or a synchronous class would be online. Businesses use learning management systems just like we do. Canvas is our learning management system here on campus. For organizations, learning management systems help you actually provide this kind of training. Like if you have an asynchronous online training, you can load up your modules on all of the materials and content on that learning management system and allow employees to access that. It also can keep records and do things kind of automatically. For example, if you finish a course and you've gone through the last module, your learning management system can automatically generate a certificate of completion and put it into your account. It can also update then your HRIS that this person has finished this particular training. So that's why it can be very helpful for organizations, especially large ones that have a lot of training, to see what all the kinds of training are that employees have and to make it easily available. A really common kind of training, and I bet a lot of you have had this experience, is on-the-job training. I remember I had on-the-job training in my very first job when I worked at a fast food restaurant. I had to learn how to use the cash register. That was my first kind of task. And so we did on-the-job training where we were at a store that wasn't yet open and we could play with the registers. And then we had a group of us doing the training. So we would act like customers and then you would have to try to figure out how to put the order into the cash register. This is really common, especially for new employees, but also when employees are doing training for on new equipment or in a new job. It's very helpful for people who are learning because you get immediate feedback from the person that you're training with. And it's usually one-on-one training or one in a small group of people. So it's even more, there's more feedback than there is in instructor training in a classroom, for example. The trainer can also then demonstrate how to do the task that they want someone to do and then have that person try out the task, the person who's learning, and then they can help give them feedback about how to improve the way they're actually doing the task. The one big drawback on the job training is it takes a lot of time. And so for example, you have the person who's learning, but you also have the person who has to train them. And they may actually be doing the training while they're doing the job. So our book talks about a really common example in restaurants when you have wait staff that is in training. They may actually be following around someone who's already part of the wait staff, learning how to take orders, learning how to bring out the food, learning to get feedback from customers and that sort of thing. In which case, if a mistake happens while you're on the job training, in that case, the customers has to suffer a little bit as well then going through that training with those people and then fixing that mistake. Some of you will get to do simulations. I've never had a job that had a simulation, but this sounds like a lot of fun. And some of you have probably already played some of these simulations because there's some games that are simulations like flight simulators. A simulation is when you get to use the actual equipment you would use on the job, but you use a computer-based model to actually try it out. And the reason we have simulations is I would say it's twofold. One is we use simulations a lot for jobs that are quite dangerous to do on-the-job training with. So things like flight simulators, using dangerous equipment. We have healthcare professionals who do simulations. You don't want to be learning how to do surgery on an actual person. You're going to want to train to do that first before you actually go into surgery. So we have simulations for that reason. The other reason is simulations can sometimes allow users, depending on how it's available at the organization, can allow users to get many, many hours of on-the-job training without having to force someone to sit with them during on-the-job training, especially after their initial learning. They may be able to just try out something over and over until they've kind of mastered that skill. We also have gamification and virtual reality happening in more and more organizations. So again, I think a lot of you will have this experience at some point. Gamification is when we start applying kind of game theory. So we start applying points. There might be competitions to get training done. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily playing games, but it could be that for like every training, for example, you're going to get a point and you have to accrue so many points during the year. And there could be a leaderboard showing how many points each person's accrued over the calendar year. And then maybe there's a prize for someone who's accrued the most points in training. There's also virtual reality, and I know some retail stores, for example, are starting to do virtual reality, and this is when you use kind of the virtual reality headsets to get a 3D image of something that's in the computer, essentially, that's feeding it to the goggles or the equipment that you're using for virtual reality, and then you can sort of do on the job training. It's a little bit like a simulation, but you're not necessarily using the equipment you would use. You're just going through the situations you would have in that workplace or in that organization. The beginning of our chapter has a really good example of virtual reality and gamification with a Walmart game that they make employees that's available for some employees to play to figure out how to stock shelves and answer customer questions and that sort of thing. So if you're not sure what this is, I would go look at that at the beginning of the chapter. That might give you a better idea of what gamification and virtual reality looks like. So to figure out if our training, whatever kind of training we choose, is actually working, we have two kinds of assessments. The first kind is what we call formative assessment or formative evaluation. And this is to figure out what is going on while someone's learning so we can start correcting and giving them feedback so they can learn better. So this could be things like you could have test results like in class, for example. I try to use your quizzes, for example, every week as a formative assessment just to see where you're at. That's why you get to take it as many times as you want. You can get reactions from learners about their learning and what they think they could use more help with. You can observe learners and see where they might need some tweaking. You can ask subject matter experts for their opinions, colleagues, all sorts of people can provide lots of formative assessment. This can also be useful if you're developing assessments online, for example, and you could have people trying out those modules or that training before you actually have learners doing that training, and they can give you feedback. That can be a type of formative assessment as well. Summative assessment is after learners have learned what they're supposed to in the training to figure out what did they learn and then what did they take away. And you all have experience with summative assessment, that's or evaluation. That's what tests are in our class and probably in many of your other classes as well. But you can have other kinds of data that you collect, asking like questionnaires, asking how people could apply this in their jobs, surveys about whether they like the training or how they see this being applicable to the work that they do. You can interview people, you can do observations, and you can do testing. Summative assessment is often done immediately at the end of a training, but it can also be done after the training, several weeks or even months later, to see how long people kept the learning that they got from that training, how they've been applying that learning, and then whether that learning over time is actually helping those employees do their jobs better. And I included this really helpful graphic that I found online about formative versus summative assessments. So formative is when the chef tastes the soup while they're making the soup, but summative is when the guest tastes the soup after the chef has completed the process of making that soup. We also have beta and pilot testing, and this is more for like when we're using simulations or online training where we're developing modules. A beta test would be when you have all the content sort of formalized and you're asking people to walk through the content to give you suggestions or recommendations or ask you questions about how that content is laid out, if it's in a logical order, if people are learning all the things they need to learn through all of as they're walking through that content to actually master the topic they're supposed to learn about in the training. A pilot test is later when you've actually created all of the course, for example, and then you're going to have people actually go through that entire course. A lot of times their feedback can be about content, but it would also be about things like, does the course work? Do all the modules open? Can I actually access all the quizzes and complete them? So pilot tests can include a little bit of content, but it also often includes kind of the technology that's being used to make sure everything works as it's supposed to.